but there's no follow-up. If you've had a missed interaction, then you need to have a purposeful conversation after it's done. We are taught to say things like, oh, we're just really blunt. Okay, but blunt is different. There's transparency and the empathy that comes with those things. How do you break through and really harness conflict?
Welcome to Real Estate Leadership Unlocked. I'm Debbie Lariviere, founder of Monter Coaching, where we work with brokerage owners, independent firm leaders, and team leads to build profitable, scalable businesses grounded in strategy, clarity, and performance. Today, I am thrilled to be talking with Laurie Fainer of Dynamic Alchemy Advisors. She will walk us through her powerful home method, hearing fully, owning your view, mapping your terrain, and executing with clarity as a fresh guide for navigating conflict. We will also get Laurie's best interview questions for assessing how candidates handle conflict and resolution, plus a gentle nudge to every thoughtful leader out there that at the end of every conversation or meeting, we should be asking ourselves, is there something we are not saying that we should be? Pull out your notepad because this episode promises real tools, a splash of wit, and meaningful takeaways that your business can't afford to miss. Let's dive in. Welcome, Laurie. I am so excited that you're here today with me. I have learned so much from you in our previous conversations about the marriage between HR strategy, coaching, conflict resolution, embracing the conflict, all things within the brokerage team and self space that we experience. And so what I'd love to do is I would love to kick off by having you tell us a little bit about your journey and what got you to this place where you really enjoy working on teams or with companies around conflict communication and authenticity.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for having me here today. I've enjoyed our conversations separately around the industry, and I'm really excited to share some perspectives with you. I feel like in the last few months, every time I'm asked, how did you get started? I'm always really thoughtful about it because I feel like if you would have asked me this a year ago, I would have said, oh, I fell into it. It started with a deep love of learning and developing community. It's what led me to get my master's in community development. I've built internal learning teams at, large companies, Ernst & Young, Lloyd, then moved into HR consulting in their large practice and really focused on, how do you shift cultures and performance? And even from there, I use that as a jump off point, and I led HR for a tech company, as well as more relevant to your audience, a large luxury real estate firm that held a number of different assets. And, it was really in that experience that I watched high potential teams buckle under the miscommunication and conflict that occurs between themselves, their teams, their brokerages, and it really started to spark my curiosity about conflict and authenticity. And so I would reflect back, as I said, in the last 12 months, I've been asked this question. I'm trying to come up with a good answer. And I would say it's shifted for me. This is not something I fell into. I have been really purposeful about how I've spent my time doing more of a deep dive, advanced certification, refining my skills in conflict resolution. And ultimately, what led me to develop my company, Dynamic Alchemy Advisors, where we spent a lot of time with organizations doing that hard work. So, where most folks kind of end their consulting engagements, that's actually where we dive in. And, it sparked that curiosity in me. How can we actually help teams, brokerages, individuals develop a curiosity, non-judgmental? How do you break through and really harness conflict as an accelerator, as a growth accelerator for yourself and your business? So I would say today that's where I'm at. It's come from a love of really wanting to help folks move through tense times, trouble in the marketplace, and have them come out of it better, faster, quicker than they were before.
I love it. And what's interesting about the word conflict is that oftentimes as team leaders or brokerage firm owners, we look at it as it's just a small little blip in time. It's just a season our company's going through or our team is going through. And either we as leaders, they either jump on our train and ride with us or they jump off. Like that's how conflict is handled in a lot of the different organizations. And they don't see it as an opportunity to lean in and really grow themselves as leaders. And that's what I know with coaching. I'll have, agents and brokerage firm owners come and they'll say, oh, I've got this issue. And to them, it's just a minuscule moment in time of something they have to handle when really it's a strategy and a practice that helps us all grow as leaders and creating a filter for some of us who are a little more direct. And then two, embracing the fact that it's an opportunity for growth. When you think about the leaders that you've worked with, let's stay in the real estate space and then in some even in tech. When you think about conflict, what patterns do you typically see, or what are some of those different signs that you see that yes, this is conflict. This isn't about like you missed the due diligence date, right? This is more about true conflict within the team or within the organization or with the leader. What are some of the patterns that you see within the different individuals that you're going in and working with them on?
You know what? It's so interesting because there's actually 5 levels of escalation in conflict. And within that, you'll sort of see different tension points, and they can start and be as small as, somebody cut somebody off in a meeting and they're starting to build resentment. It can come from misaligned expectations. It can come from, I call it skipped conversations where you just forgot to tell somebody something. And so you'll see some of that on the teams, but there's actually a framework for that. And that's where it goes to kind of those 5 levels of escalations. It kind of goes from like a small disagreement and, you just need to solve a problem. So you've misaligned, something needs to get fixed, and you can come back from that. The next level of escalation is around kind of that us versus them tension. And it's really interesting because we've always been taught, oh, you get to us versus them, you can't solve it. But actually you can. The goal is to help somebody change a mind, change a thought. And, how can we help people to get past that? But there's actually there's more levels of conflict underneath that. So, you can have this small disagreement that goes into an us versus them, that goes into conflict and triangulation. And it's like the perspectives. How do you have affirmation for one of the perspectives? What is the deep-seated problem? And from there, you really go into, there's kind of like conflict and a tipping point. So like that's the next level. And in there, it's like self-preservation at all costs. Once you get there, it's harder to come back. But you've already had like 4 levels of escalation. And finally, the end is that conflict entrenchment. So that's where the goal is to like destroy each other at all costs. So you kind of walk through it. And I'd say that's what I notice. I notice it always starts as something small, but we're not catching it when it's something small. When it's a small disagreement that is about the business, a missed conversation, somebody cut somebody off in a meeting, just something tiny that if we actually had that forthright conversation to say, hey, you know what? I didn't realize that you wanted that listing presentation at 2. We didn't align on the timing. That gets solved. But instead, it builds up and kind of walks through that escalation path until it gets to that deep entrenchment. And that deep entrenchment looks like, you know what? Debbie never gets the listing presentation done on time. She has terrible time management. And as we kind of walk through that, it becomes a much more deep-seated thing. So I'd say that's what I've noticed in the teams is that it escalates so quickly because there's no one to bring it back. And we're not taught the skills to bring those conflicts back. So again, I think there's a lot of great work to be done on how can you stop things at a 2 before they get to a 10.
Yeah. And my assistant will attest to this when he's listening to this podcast. One of the things I say when I hire is that one thing you can guarantee from me is that I'm transparent. Now, transparent doesn't equate to I'm going to yell and scream at you or I'm going to tell you every time you're wrong. Transparent to me gives me the permission to go to him and say, hey, do you remember when I hired you and I told you I'm very transparent, but also being vulnerable at the same time to say, hey, that thing, I'm going to take responsibility because I didn't give you the timeline that I needed to hit that deadline and we didn't hit it. And so clearly there was some type of miscommunication there, but I have have found myself in times going, I am too busy to have this conversation now. I'll just have it later. And I never have it. And that's what you say, that's the miscommunication. And we make
Yeah.
this bubble so much bigger that it was just a missed deadline. We don't even know why they missed the deadline, because this bubble just gets bigger and bigger and bigger because we don't have the time.
And I love what you said around the transparency because, we are taught to say things like, oh, we're just really blunt. Okay, but blunt is different. There's transparency and the empathy that comes with those things. So it's that joint, the two things can both be true. I can be transparent and I can also, have empathy for where you are. I can say, hey, listen, I'm sorry I didn't communicate this to you. That must be hard and you must be feeling kind of irritated. And being able to actually acknowledge where the other person is coming from is so helpful in that. And it's different than blunt because blunt is just saying a perspective without caring how the other person feels. So I love that you are talking about what that transparency looks like. It's owning your part of it too, which is so critical when you're thinking about conflict.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because in the real estate world, I'm sure you're familiar with the DISC assessment. Everyone, I often hear leaders say, well, I'm just a high D. My D showed up. I have too much D for this person. And to me, that's an excuse, right? That's an excuse not to approach conflict from a solution-based mindset. It's more of a, here's all the things. I'm just a D. Take it and run. And I'll talk to you next time I want to be a D. Right? Instead of a solution-based approach, When you think about some of the work that you're doing with some of the teams that you're working with, what are some of those challenges that you're working through with them?
You know what? It's so interesting because I would have told you before that it was, issues with the broader organization, right? They're not spending money where they need to be. You don't understand the decisions they're making. And while that still exists, it's actually interesting to see that pivot of conflict within themselves. It's, they're looking at the market around them. There's nothing they can change. Obviously, in real estate, it's been tough for quite some time. And so it's, how are they able to develop that resiliency, that grit? So there's an academic named Angela Duckworth, and she talks a lot about the most successful people develop grit. They are able to get up again and keep trying. That concept of growth mindset that, everything is yet. You haven't done something yet. It's not that you're never going to do it. And I would say in these moments now, people are really struggling with that inner conflict of, is it that I haven't done it yet? Or am I never going to do it because I haven't? So that real pivot to self has been very interesting. It's people are really second guessing themselves. And it's that division. And I talk a lot to teams about this, that division between work and who you are as a person. And why that's so critical is you might be having trouble in your business. That is a real honest thing going on. All you can do is control the things, name the things and control the things that you can in your business. But just because you're having trouble in your business doesn't mean you're a bad person, doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means at a point in time right now, things aren't working. So yeah, that for me has been the real shift. And as I said, you still see the organizational things change.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like it does get back to like you mentioned, you do quite a bit of consulting with HR as well as teams and brokerages. It really comes back to focusing on what we can control, and that's something that shows up quite often in my coaching calls. Is that yes, the market has changed. I'm not going to say it's harder, more challenging, easier. Whenever you're listening to this, that is the best thing about real estate is that I can guarantee you will wake up tomorrow. Doesn't matter if it's a drastic change or a small change. Real estate will be different. It will be a new form. It will be a new client. It will be a new closing, a new attorney, a new lender, a new policy. Every day is a new day in real estate. We can't control that. And I think sometimes too, we try to focus on the things we can't control versus, like you said, maybe your business isn't doing as well as you would like. And I have to ask brokerage firm owners, have you poured into your agents? Are you making the recruiting calls? Are you building culture in your office? And the same with the teams. I think sometimes when we get frustrated about the things we can't control, we blame it on the people in our organization, right? It's the fact that the director of operations isn't leading the internal sales agents to make more calls, right? We start to focus on the things that are other people's responsibility instead of helping them redirect to what can they actually control, which will drive the entire organization forward. And that's just something that it's real estate. That's why I say no one dies in real estate. I promise. It might feel like it some days, but no one dies in real estate. And it's just digging deep and saying, okay, this is where we are now. What are the needle moving activities that we can do today in each person's role that makes us like each other again? And maybe we
Yep.
should go axe throwing because we feel like throwing one at your head. So let's go take an axe throwing trip or
Yeah.
a whitewater rafting and pray no one falls out of the boat. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it is that internal angst that we experience as leaders. And we try really hard not to project that. And we do that as parents too, right? We have a
Yeah.
bad day, we go home, we take it out on our kids and our spouses. But that's interesting that learning to control your internal conflict at a higher level too as a leader.
And it's shifted. So I've actually recently redefined my coaching program.
Mhm.
And what I've done in the coaching program is actually created 4 segments. So the first segment, and this is on, larger teams. We do it individually as well, but the first segment really focuses on knowing yourself. What's your why? What's your North Star? Because that's the thing you're always going to go back to. And then from knowing yourself, how can you adapt your style to work better with other people around you? But that core piece feeds right into the next phase, which is really about business planning. So you're creating tangible actions and activities based on your style. So for example, don't say that you're going to go door knocking. You're going to make 50 door knocks over the course of 2 weeks if that's something that you dread. So you make this business plan that then actually ties to the things you like to do, the things that are authentic to you, which again, it's like getting through that conflict with yourself. Be honest. If you don't like the thing, don't put it on your board of what you're going to do. And from there, once you've sort of created your business plan for the year, it's reinforcing those behaviors afterward. So you said you're going to accomplish this. So what are you doing every single day to accomplish this? And again, it's that how do you silence that inner critic, that imposter syndrome, deal with that self-conflict to be able to move forward? And the fourth pillar in this is really about this sustain and grow. So you know yourself, you've got your why, you've got your business plan. Now you've got the behaviors stacked to make yourself successful. And then what are you taking with you as you continue to build it out? And that's what I've seen is really resonating. No longer do people want this kind of higher order, let's just whiteboard. People want that tangibility of help me deal with my inner self, my inner conflict. Then let's see how we deal with it on the team. And then let's talk about growth for the larger organization.
Yeah, and that was a question I was thinking of as you were describing the 4 steps. To me, I see that as a leadership tool, right? So we take the
Yeah.
leader through those processes. And then when you think about the team members and embracing conflict, not handling, but embracing conflict, how are you coaching them or what tools are you bringing to the table that can help them communicate better? And have strategy around what they're working to accomplish too, because oftentimes the team leader's goals aren't necessarily the team members' goals, which causes conflict in itself. But how are we encouraging the team members to embrace what's around them and still understand the hierarchy of leadership?
It's really interesting. I developed an acronym because my brain's like a sieve. I can't remember anything. And I wanted to make it's not just for real estate professionals, but it just happens to be a great acronym for them as well. But the acronym is actually called it's HOME, HOME. And the reason I've sort of thought about it in this way is in order to be able to manage through conflict, you've got to be able to really focus on that center. So that home in yourself. And that first kind of stage is really hearing fully. So you create that space to hear all of the perspectives, right? You want someone to share and you want to be able to go to somebody and say, I'd like to better understand your view. And then that thing that's really hard, you're going to listen 80%, you're going to talk 20%. So you're really sitting there and ingesting what's being said to you. You're not thinking about how you're going to respond. You're not thinking about, jumping in and defending yourself. You're really just hearing that perspective. And then you're going to reflect it back. So what I'm hearing you say is that whole piece of the H, the hear fully, that opens the door and shows the person in front of you that you really are ready to engage in that tension conversation. From there, you go into that own your view and you get clearer on your part of the situation before you move forward. So to the example you gave earlier with your assistant, it's really being able to say, I know that I made a mistake by not telling you this, and I'm sorry. Because when you start with that, when you can acknowledge that your actions were in that as well, it allows for more open dialogue. You're coming from a place where you want to solve this together. You're acknowledging that, you got some hot buttons, they might have some hot buttons, and you're offering a micro apology. You're not saying, listen, I am sorry for everything I've ever done, which feels inflammatory. You're saying, I can see how in this piece of the conversation, I could have done something differently. And, one of the things I have a former boss who always says, whenever you're talking about conflict, always use I feel statements because no one can argue with your feelings. That's again, that piece of that own your view. The next piece around, I call it mapping your terrain. And it's really about uncovering the underlying needs and the shared goals. So, identify the positions versus your interests. So what solution is on the table and what does the need drive? For example, we both want a smooth closing on the 30th. Okay, that's the shared goal. How things were communicated around that shared goal, that's where the tension lies. But we come from the same place. We are on the same team doing the same things together. And, both and thinking. So it's this really interesting idea where two things can be true. And as humans, sometimes we really struggle with that. So when you think about, you both want that smooth closing by the 30th, the both and thinking is we need speed and accuracy. And it's both and because it really is about we need two of these things to occur. If you have speed, you might not be accurate. If you got accurate, you might not have speed. The closing is not going to get done by the 30th. So in that mapping the terrain, it's really understanding what's the shared goal, what can be true to get there and actually, get that closing done. And then lastly, it's about executing with clarity. So really, going back to the example you said before, actually brainstorming. So what are the next steps so that we can honor getting that done? Who's responsible for what? What is the timeline? And setting those smart goals around it. What is measurable? What is attainable within that framework? And then planning a check-in. And this is the piece I find people will have this blowout. They go through this conflict. They're thoughtful about it in the moment, but there's no follow-up. If you've had a missed interaction, then you need to have a purposeful conversation after it's done to just make sure everybody is realigned. So again, I think it's this, this framework around home about hearing fully, owning your view, mapping the terrain, and then executing with clarity. That's kind of the framework because it's easy to remember. And most of it is just, coming to the table with unconditional positive regard. Everyone wants to show up and do their best work. So
Yeah, I love that. And what I hear in that too is when we talk about numbers, I always say with numbers, and not everyone loves numbers. And to be quite honest, it's a newfound appreciation for me too, because the numbers aren't emotional. And that's where I see this step-by-step process for home is it actually removes the emotion that could be laid on the table by forcing yourself to sit down and hear them, right? All the way down to execution. One of the questions I had for you is when you see conflict resolution in progress, what are the steps that get skipped? And I think you hit the nail on the head with the forget to check in, right? We forget to confirm. It's no different than at the end of a coaching call, you say, okay, based on our call today, here are your 3 action items. And so it's based on this conversation, here are your 3 action items. I truly believe that conflict arises when expectations aren't met. Most of the time they are unspoken.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yes. It's people we do this thing where we assume everybody thinks the way that we do, but they don't. Right. So, and everybody has a different style. And part of my coaching program, we unlock what those different styles are because it's a reminder that we're not all the same. We don't approach things, even if you're on the same team as somebody, you're not going to think about it the same way. So you have to verbally articulate it exactly as you said. You have to say out loud, my expectation is X and Y. Does that align with what you're thinking? Great. Let's put it on the calendar and get it done. But in the absence of that, just because you thought about the expectation doesn't mean it came out of your mouth unless you're intentional about it, right? So, yeah.
Well, and it's interesting we talk about coaching and consulting. So often people view coaching and consulting as oftentimes therapy, and sometimes it is. There are times, those of you listening who have shared your innermost secrets with me, we'll leave those outside of this podcast, but there are times where it is therapy. And I also look at therapy as addressing what's behind us and coaching and consulting as forming solutions around the things in front of us. And that is where, like with the home method, it's sitting down at the table with a team or with a group of leaders or a board of directors and saying, okay, we need to all hear each other and we're going to go one at a time. And it's not about what was behind us. It's not about all those things that were unspoken before or all the things we didn't hit when we said that we should and those things that we missed. It's about listening to where we are and projecting it forward. And that's the best part about coaching and consulting.
Well, and it's really interesting as I've gone through and honed my skills and taken more courses in conflict resolution and mediation. I had one of my professors, have a really powerful concept that I had to think about. And it was this concept that if a client or a person, if it's your spouse, if it's your kids, if they're telling you about a conflict, you actually have to approach the other side with unconditional positive regard. So instead of saying, Debbie, if you came to me and said, listen, I'm having a conflict with Sally, we're just not on the same page, I actually have to say, maybe Sally's trying her best. So, and you're trying your best. So instead of that thing we typically do, which would be like, Debbie, yes, Sally sounds like a nightmare. I actually have to, as your coach, say, we're going to take a step back. We are going to look at, this a framework, and it talks about, intent, action, and impact. And I don't know Sally's backstory. I don't know her intentions, but we can talk specifically about the actions that took place and the impact it had, and we can do it from a neutral place. And that was really key, right? Because I'd say earlier in my career, you're sort of taught to side with the person you're talking to. But I'm sure you've seen this in your practice where you're coaching teams and, Sally comes to you and Jim comes to you and they have two different sides of the story. And so much about the program that I've recently been in talks about coming alongside people to help them solve it, but not taking a side. And if you are in a position where you can't do that, you can't be that third party, then you're not the right person to help come along and have that conflict solve. You're in the right position to recommend somebody else helps come alongside them. But it's getting out of that loop of like, you're never going to really know somebody's backstory and intentions. So when someone comes to you and says it, you kind of have to pause them and say, let's focus on the actions. Let's not assume what's going on in someone's backstory. And again, you have to support both sides with that. Everyone's trying to do their best. And that was such a different way of thinking about it than I'd heard before.
I love it. And as you're talking, I'm envisioning some of our mega teams where the team lead is actually the police in the situation because the team members, he took my lead, she held my open house, that person talked to me first, the marketing person didn't get me what I needed in time to do my XYZ. And so oftentimes we as the leader become the police or the parent in the situation. And I like that to where you don't necessarily take sides of who's normally right. It's more of okay, let's take a step back, look at the action, look at the impact. And sometimes it's mountain out of a molehill, right? Sometimes it's not that big a deal. Again, no one dies in real estate.
Yeah. No. And again,
they die in real estate sometimes, but not because of real estate.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's that separation between, the personal and the work. Because if we just look at the actions are just about the work. And there's space in that to improve how we do our work because it's growth mindset. We can learn to work better, faster, quicker. It's when people start to take it personally that it gets so deeply entrenched, as I said, those like 5 levels of escalation. And we need to separate that out. It's just about the work. And if we can have clear heads, hear where somebody's coming from, you get to that deeper level of vulnerability, authenticity, and trust, which are needed for strong teams.
Yeah, and culture is so big with teams, and oftentimes team leads or agents will say it's about the splits, and it's really not. It's about how we communicate. It's about how authentic we are with each other, how vulnerable we can be with each other, how supportive we are with each other. And if it's a constant butting of heads, how do you get there, right? How do you get there?
Yeah.
And again, it's sometimes taking responsibility.
Totally. And I would say, earlier in my career, I don't think I valued as much or appreciated as much the importance of working with people whose values you share, who you love working with, who have each other's backs, and you can build that trust, be vulnerable. And again, part of why I created my own company is I want to work with great people. I want to make sure our values align. I want us to be in it together, and I want to be able to steer those decisions. So similar to your real estate agents, it's like that CEO mindset of your own your own business, right? Whether it is me, where I own my own business, or you're an independent contractor real estate agent. You need to have that CEO mindset, regardless of what brokerage you're in, and wanting to have great people on your team, wanting to work in a brokerage that you align with from a values perspective, and making sure you feel really comfortable in what your why is so critical. As I said earlier in my career, I wouldn't have thought of
Well, I want to dive into the HR side. I know you worked in that space
it.
for quite some time because this, I think, is something that we can train ourselves on. When you think about hiring the right people for roles and you're approaching interviews, oftentimes it's about skill set or personality styles, working styles, different assessments, references that we get. At the same time, how are you assessing for will this person bring conflict to our organization, or does this person come with a solution-based mindset? How are you assessing who the right fit for your team is and considering conflict on the front end?
You know what? It's really interesting because I think that a lot of skills can be taught, especially within real estate. If you have enough experience and you have enough repeats, right? It's that concept of you do it for so many hours, you get really great at it. So technical skills aside, assuming that this person has the technical skills, it's really about those behavioral based questions, right? One of the biggest predictors of future behavior is your past behavior and almost pressing people. So when you say, hey, Debbie, tell me about a time where you've had to deliver a difficult message to a client. I want you to outline for me what was the situation? What was the actions you took? And what was the result? And were there any key learnings from it? Suddenly, you've given somebody the space to either say they've been through it before and tell you about it, or they're going to show you very obviously that they haven't. And so really getting crisp on, tell me about the conflict you've dealt with before. Tell me about a time where you've delivered a difficult message. Tell me about the time you were on a team and you disagreed with a decision that they were making. How were you able to have your point of view heard? So actually asking people to tell you what they do and what they say is important, because I will say people will always show you and tell you who they are, especially in the behavioral questioning, because you don't let them off the hook. You don't let them off the hook by saying like, you know what, I've had a conflict, but then we talked it through and it was fine. That's not good enough. You're going to say, I love hearing that. Tell me a little bit more about the situation that led to that. So you as the interviewer adding a little bit more rigor to your process helps to unlock some of it. I also think that it's helpful to not just have one person interview, but have somebody else. So a first level interview and a second level interview. That way it allows multiple perspectives to maybe see something that was missed. So for example, when I hire on my teams, and I've done this for years, I always hire my opposite. And the reason I hire my opposite is I want to avoid blind spots. And so if I'm interviewing somebody and my partner's interviewing somebody, we're going to catch it. We're going to see what could be the possible challenges with roles. So I would encourage any leader to ask really great behavioral questions, which are all Googleable. It'll come up real quick. So it's, very easy. Put it into ChatGPT. They'll list a whole bunch for you, even with answers that are acceptable. I would say always having multiple perspectives, not more than two, but two really good perspectives on a candidate, listening and watching the behaviors of the candidate. Do they send you a thank you note afterward? Are they on time? How do they treat the reception staff, the admin folks? Because that's huge. If someone comes in and they're rude to the admin staff, that tells you something about them. So paying attention to those little micro behaviors will allow you to hire somebody whose values align, who's a great fit for the team.
I hope everyone listening is taking notes because I have been. There's so much great information here. Some of the things that I heard just in the interview process, because one of the key things that we do at Monter Coaching is we help our clients interview potential candidates for their team. So we have them go through the screening interview and the first step, but before they hire, we come in and do a situational based interview too, like you said, as a third party,
Amazing.
because we
Yeah.
know our clients inside and out. We know what hits their buttons. We know what they're looking for in the role. And so that, when you said, my favorite part of what you said is digging back into what you learned from the experience. We ask oftentimes, like, tell me about a time that you had this and what were your steps in resolving it and what was the outcome? But what did you learn? Because I'm looking for, did they learn something?
Exactly.
from that experience. And I wrote that down because that's a great question to ask. What did you learn from that? And you'll know if they actually learned something or not, because they'll have to, and it's okay to pause, but whether they have an answer or, yeah, I learned that my previous employer isn't very nice. What is it that you
Uh,
actually learned about yourself
100%.
from that? And then the other key thing that you said there was, how do you have your point of view heard, right? Oftentimes
Yeah,
we will get responses that explain how the conversation went or what was
yeah,
entailed within the conversation. I think it's very important to say, how do you get your point of view heard? I think that's a great review question too. If you're doing a 30, 60, 90 annual review, in working with us, how have you had success in being heard? Right? That's a great
absolutely.
telltale sign of how you're showing up as a leader, but also, are they communicating what's behind the scenes or behind the curtain? Or do we need to sit there and peel the onion back because they're not communicating? They're not being heard, or they don't feel like they're being heard. So those were two key questions that I made note of, because to me, that's deep. That's asking for really what you're wanting to know versus how do you handle conflicts. Well, everyone's going to say, well, we talk about it, and we'll ask questions like, how long do you wait? Oh, I address it, or I'll go home and think about it and talk to my spouse and I'll come back. But again, how did you get hurt and what did you learn? Huge.
And it's really interesting because I've found with some of my client teams, the answer to that question is, well, I didn't know it could be heard. Like, I just went along with whatever the leadership did because they're more senior, they're more experienced, and there's actually something about unlocking, like, your perspective matters too. It's okay to give your perspective, be heard, and then they decide to go in another direction. That's okay. And you, as part of the team, will support that other direction. But you can feel good knowing that you said, hey, actually, I'm thinking something different, right? And being able to speak up is a real powerful tool.
Yeah. And that's the book Lean In. They talk about like sitting at the table, right? Getting in there and at least giving your 2 cents as long as it's productive. And I think so often as leaders, we are going so fast that we think we already have the answers, and creating that space, maybe not at a weekly meeting, but maybe that is a quarterly assessment of the different tasks that we're working on, projects we're working on, initiatives we're pursuing, and getting feedback, because to me it's just a difference of perspective, right? We see it from our perspective of running fast, putting deals on the board, making sure the cash flow is right so that we can pay all these people that we employ, growing the company the way we define scale. Scale is such a buzzword now, and it's so huge. But
Yeah.
again, like slowing down, I could even see this as a mid-year and year-end review where we just hear everyone. And it also gives our employees the opportunity to feel heard. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I love that. So when you think about vulnerability, this is always something that I'm curious about. How vulnerable do I have to be as a leader? Because I feel like if I show my vulnerability, that they're going to take advantage of me.
I mean, I think you got to show people who you really are. If you want people to go through the fire with you, they've got to really understand who you are as a leader, what's important to you, and what does it mean to be on the team. Brene Brown has this great clip where she talks about vulnerability, and she was giving a talk and she was working with a translator, and the translator, they were really trying to understand, like, how do you in ASL, how do you actually showcase vulnerability? And the ASL translator shows her and she's like, that's really not the sign for vulnerable. Like, that's not how I feel. And the ASL translator says, well, I've got one more sign. And it's sort of, you kind of like open. And Brene Brown's like, yes, that's what I mean by vulnerable. And I'd say that definition resonated with me. It's really about the shirt off your back, opening it up, getting really in there to say, this is who I am. And you're going to come with me because I'm going to tell you who I really am. And we're going to get in there together. I think there's, we grew up in a time where leaders are like, they don't tell you anything. They are staunch. They are reserved. They never show humanity. I'd say in the current climate that we are in, it is really hard to face the fire with somebody who never shows you who they really are. And, again, it goes back to, it's that disconnect between this and wanting to get in there versus like pulling back the shirt and saying, actually, this is who I really am. Some days are good, some days are bad. And some days I just need to know that we can look at each other and say, wow, this is really hard. This is really tough, but we're going to get through it together.
How soon does a leader show that to a new team member, a new board of directors member? someone that's in there, the team with them.
I mean, the way that I think about it is if you're in the role you're in, you've got the credibility because chances are you've got the skills. That's why you were hired into the role. So showing up on day one as your true self is important. It's that authenticity piece. People have, we want humanity. We want to connect to other people. So day one, being able to show up and say to the team, I'm so excited to be here. There's so much that we're going to accomplish together. And I got your back. You've got my back. Some days are going to be great. Some days are going to be tough, but we're in it together. And it's not about saying my door is always open, as we would have heard before many, many years. It's actually about showing them that your door is open, going to them sometime and saying, you know what, today was really a tough day. This really big deal fell through and I worked so hard on it. That's a really tough day. Being able to say that to somebody else on the team so they can see the humanity in you, day one, I think it's critical.
Yeah. Well, and we say, oftentimes we'll hear everything rises and falls on leadership. And I think everything rises and falls on trust. And you can't have trust unless you have vulnerability. And I'll
Yep.
give the example of myself. So I would define myself as a leader who, unless you knew, you don't know what's going on behind the space because there is always a smile. It is always a smile. We always have things to do. We always have things to accomplish. And if you are in my team, if my assistant is sitting across the desk from me, he knows that this isn't a smile, it's just a smile, right? And I think that there's something to be said for that because even he knows that I'm going to be authentic with him. And then also he can trust me when if I say it's a hard day, he knows I'm not just saying it's a hard day because I
Yeah.
want to go home or I've got something to do. It is just a hard day. And that gives him permission to have hard days. Things come up, life happens. So just put it out there. And that's where that trust comes in. And without vulnerability, and I think it's Brene Brown that says the vulnerability-based trust, you can't have trust without vulnerability. And a lot of these tactics actually counteract conflict.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Because if you are vulnerable, then you can say to somebody, hey, you know what? That conversation we had, I want to revisit it. Can we talk about that again? I really want to better understand your perspective.
Mhm.
And that's the critical piece. It's you're not coming and posturing and saying like, you're wrong. You're actually being reflective to say, typically Debbie's really easy to deal with, but she really dug in on this. I want to better understand why this point is what she dug in on. And I love what you said about giving your assistant also the permission to be human. That's what's changed. I would say post pandemic, where, we spent 5 years kind of fearful working in our houses or in the real estate world, showing the houses with booties and masks on. And that's really what the change has been is we're now real people. We've seen people in their homes as themselves and we want that human connection. It's what we've missed, right? In that world where we couldn't, everything was done virtually and with masks in a really sterile place. It's giving someone permission to just be a human because some days are good and some days are hard.
Yeah. And I want all the listeners to not get us wrong in that there are people that are not the right fit for your organization. There are people
100%.
that thrive, and I'm like thinking of some in my head, thrive on stirring the pot. And then they throw like the magic potion in there when that's,
Yeah.
there are those people, and that's just their true behavioral style is that they thrive on conflict. That's where they live. At the same time, all of these tactics that you've offered help us address it. They help us prevent it. Then they help us embrace what is in front of us to decide to make the true decision of, is this person worthwhile for our organization? Or do we as leaders need to grow because we aren't showing up the way we need to? So yeah, there are
Really
tricky people.
interesting. Yeah. And that's what I was going to say. It's really interesting because I can't tell you how many leaders they'll sit down and do kind of the assessment of like, tell me about your team. And there's always that one person. Well, John is always really difficult to deal with. He always has something to say. He's so loud, we can't really curb him. And I would say in that, we've got to find a way to say, so is John the right fit for your team? Do you like that's the behavior that John exhibits? Do you like that he stirs the pot? Some cultures and organizations are going to say, absolutely. I love it. It keeps it fresh. I actually enjoy that he challenges everyone. And others are going to say, no, I think it puts a lot of stress and tension on the team. I just don't know what to do about it. And that's where we go back to, okay, Let's use a home framework. Let's talk about those 5 levels of escalation so that we can really better understand how to proactively deal with things.
I love it. Okay, final question. As we're wrapping the podcast, I always like to leave our listeners with some action items. So, based on your experience in working with teams and organizations, along with what you've shared, what are 2 or 3 things that they could go back and take action on today that would help improve their leadership style? And if you're not a leader, that would improve the way you show up as a team member?
You know what? It's really interesting because to your point, not everybody's running a big team. Not everyone's leading an organization. But I think the thing that everybody can do is at the end of a meeting, the end of an interaction, even if it's closed off, you got off the call, asking yourself, is there anything that we're not saying that we should be? And if you leave that call or you leave that interaction and you're like, yeah, there was 2 more action items I really wanted to make sure that we were clear on. Or, you know what, I'm not really sure that the person I was speaking to understood my expectation. I don't know if I was clear about it. In that moment, go back and clarify. Ask that one question to yourself. Is there anything we're not saying that we should? Even if you're running a team, ask it at the end of your team meetings. That way, everybody has the opportunity to say, I wasn't clear on this. I need to better understand that. Yes, tell me your perspective. So that would be the one small thing I think we could add to the day-to-day.
It's interesting. And I believe Rick Jansen's podcast is going to air just before this one. And what was interesting about that and how I'm going to compare these two is he's talking about how to improve your ChatGPT prompts. And he said, anytime you do a ChatGPT prompt, go back and at the very end, before you hit enter, ask it, what additional information do you need from me to make this better? Every single time.
Absolutely.
And that
Yeah.
goes back to that. Is there anything we're not saying that we should be? And so that to me, that's a theme, right? And I actually did start asking chat, what do you need from me to make this better? It always gives me 3 or 4 things that it needs more information on. And it's the same thing here as it's probably, maybe it's just one thing, but that we need more information on to improve, to be
Yeah.
better, to be better. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what I think is really interesting too. I use a similar prompt when I'm using my AI tool too. It doesn't matter if it's technology or it's humans. Whatever the interaction is, you need more. You need to ask that one last step to really make sure you've covered your bases. So I love the similarities there. That's great.
Yeah. Well, Laurie, thank you so much for being with us today. Real quickly, give them one more reminder of where they can find you. You're a huge resource. Where can they find you, and how can they connect? How can they connect with you if it's something that they would like to learn more about?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I also have a website. You're welcome to book a discovery call. So it's Dynamic Alchemy Advisors is the website, the name of the company, and LinkedIn. It's me, Laurie Fainer, and I answer all of the messages, the discovery calls. I'm the person that you'll see. So welcome anybody, even if you've got a small question, nothing's too small. So again, I appreciate the time on the podcast, Debbie. Thank you.
Yes, you have been a true pleasure, and I'm glad we didn't experience any conflict in our questioning. So I look forward to having you back in the future. Take care, and thank you all again for joining Real Estate Leadership Unlocked. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and like button.